Thank you so much for inviting me to talk. It's exciting. So I'm a developmental psychologist at the Centre for Family Research, and I hope what you can all see on your screen is lots of different faces. So we've got different facial expressions here that I think maybe leading you guys to think about what might be going on for these babies. So we've got one who's looks a bit sad, one who looks a little bit like they probably want to go back to sleep, another who would quite like some attention, maybe be picked up, another who's looking quite smiley, and one who looks a little bit surprised. And I think what you're needing to do here is interpret what's going on for the baby, and then that ability to respond in an appropriate and timely way, taken together, is known as sensitivity. And that's something that we as psychologists have found to be quite important in terms of children's development. So that importance of having a caregiver who is reliable and responsive to your psychological and physical needs has been shown to be key to a host of different outcomes. So in particular, people like Mary Ainsworth have looked at this in relation to children's attachment style, but it's also been shown to be linked to variability in children's cognitive skills, their social skills, their ability to regulate their emotions and their emotional understanding. So there's been lots of interest in what might cause or what might contribute to variability in parent sensitivity. So thinking about parents' own developmental history, where they've come from, their characteristics, so things like their personality, their mental health, the relationships that they have with significant others, their context, so what's going on for them in the immediate environment. But I've been interested in other prerequisites. So my research really has looked at parents mentalizing, so that ability to understand that others have thoughts and feelings as something that might be necessary for you to recognize that another person has a want that requires responding to, and that you can do that in that consistent and appropriate manner. So Ainsworth talked about sensitivity as, being able to respond appropriately, but in doing that, you might need to be able to see that the other person has a point of view from which to respond to, and that person is separate. And Liz Mines took this further and operationalized the construct of mindmindedness. So really, that extent to which the parent ascribes the infant of having a mind of their own. So here, the propensity to view another as an agent with their own thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and desires. So it's hypothesized to reflect the quality of a relationship rather than being a specific trait. However, there's more of a limited understanding of the extent to which how this develops over time, and how this expresses itself in different caregivers. So the majority of research has been with mothers of children of preschool years and over. So I was really interested to see how this might extend into the perinatal period, and also what that looks like for dads. So today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about the research I did for my doctorate and ongoing in my postdoctorate fellowship. So specifically, whether or not there are individual differences during pregnancy in expectant parents' proclivity to describe their unborn infant using mind-related attributes, whether or not parents become more mind-minded across the transition to parenthood, which you would expect if it is a relational property, and whether these individual differences in mind-mindedness during the perinatal period are important in terms of that later sensitivity, which might then mediate the relationship with later outcomes for children. So I was lucky enough to work on the New Fathers and Mothers study, which is led by Professor Claire Hughes at the Centre for Family Research. It's an international study involving over 400 families in Cambridgeshire. These were first-time expectant parents, so in Cambridge, in Leiden, in the Netherlands, and in New York as well. So we recruited these families during their first pregnancy. It's the first pregnancy for both mum and dad. And then we saw them across that transition, and saw them quite regularly, got to know them really well across the first 2 years of life, and then excitingly that is continuing. So just to say a little bit more about the sample, I guess you'll see here that it's quite a low risk sample in terms of demographics, and you'll see that for first time parents they're a little bit older than the national averages. I will say that that reflects the fact that in the Netherlands, our colleagues said they didn't find any mums younger than 21. And I guess reflecting the local population, we've got quite a high education level and personal income. But I will say that we had a lot of variability in terms of parents' mental health, and that was one of the questions guiding the framing study. So to assess parental mind-mindedness, you can do this in different ways, but I focus on representational rather than observational, because you can't observe parents interacting with their baby during pregnancy. So during the prenatal interviews, I asked the parents to give me a 5-minute speech sample. So I specifically asked them to tell me their thoughts and feelings about their baby, telling me what they thought their baby would be like and how the two of them would get along together. They had to do this for 5 minutes. And this is quite a difficult thing to do about somebody you've known for years. So asking somebody to do it about somebody that you've not yet met was a bit of a task. However, they did it. And then these speech samples were transcribed and I coded them for mind-mindedness. So to do that, you simply have to find any attribute relating to the child. So for example, here I've got, he'll be a happy little chap. And because they refer to an emotion here, happy, and that attribute would be coded as mental. Whereas it's going to be hopefully perfectly healthy would be an example of a non-mental attribute. And what you can do is you can look at the frequency or proportion of mind-related talk and use this as your indicator of mind-mindedness. So I found that during pregnancy, expectant mums and dads were able to talk. So there was a slight concern. So one small scale previous study that I'd looked at 20 mums had found that the mothers couldn't really say anything. And what I found was that 80% of expectant mothers and fathers could describe the child, and all of them were able to give at least one mind-related comment. So it felt appropriate to be able to explore some individual differences in that. But mums and dads during pregnancy were equally mentalistic. However, changes emerged postnatally. So mothers became more mind-minded across that transition. And I used latent change score models to examine intra-individual differences in the changes over time. And you see that both parents did show variability in that transition to parenthood, but that mothers increased more than fathers. And what you saw was a within couple association in that change. So if your partner was increasing, then it was a stronger likelihood that you would yourself. And just to put that in slightly different format here, we've got a figure there. You can see that more dramatic change from pregnancy to 4 months, which I would have expected to see, but still that change as the parents are getting to know their infant and the toddler. So the next step is to examine associations between those representations, those mind-minded representations that parents were holding, and their interactions. So we observed parents at each of the postnatal time points playing with the baby, and I didn't see any associations between the extent to which they were sensitive during free play sessions. So when we just said play as you'd like, so that ability to respond to infants' cues during free play sessions wasn't linked to previous mind-mindedness. However, what we did find was that mums who were more mind-minded during pregnancy were more likely to be contingent in their conversations at 6 months. So I hope you can see here that this little device is called a Lena, and it goes into the lovely little vest that one of our little participants is wearing. And that sort of records for 2 days the conversational environment of the family home. And with my colleague Eliane Fink, we have seen that mums who are more mind-minded during pregnancy were more likely to respond to a conversational bid. You might ask what a conversational bid looks like for a 6-month-old, but any sort of utterance that the child makes or vocalization is when it's matched by the parent in a quick manner. And interestingly, we also saw an association between father's early autonomy support, father's early mind-mindedness, and their later ability to support the autonomy of their toddler. So by that, I mean during a puzzle play at 14 months, dads who were able to think about their child as having a mind were more likely to respect that. So when their infant seemed to be grasping a puzzle quite well, they would step back. However, when they were struggling, they would be able to ramp up that support that was necessary. So given sort of my own inconsistent results in terms of what mind-mindedness might be important for, or what prenatal thoughts and feelings might be important for, I guess the next step that I did was to conduct a meta-analytic review to sort of try and contextualize my findings within the field. So for the review, I was mainly interested in how thoughts about the fetus predicted observed interactions during that postnatal period, and really to see how consistent study finding was and whether there was anything that systematically explained discrepancies. So I looked at interviews and questionnaires that are used to assess thoughts and feelings during pregnancy. So these questionnaires are typically seen as parent-fetal attachment measures. And then also interested in observed postnatal interaction. So to be included, there had to be both of those. And I found 14 studies that used, that fulfilled the criteria with over 1,800 mothers and fathers. And taken together, found a modest but significant association between prenatal assessments of thoughts and feelings and later sensitive interactions. And whilst modest, like I say, it was significant and wasn't susceptible to any sort of publication bias. So I did some P-curve analyses, assessed the fail-safe N, and saw that it was a pretty robust finding. What was interesting was that the magnitude of that association was different for mothers compared to fathers. So it was significant and stronger for mums than for dads. But it didn't change according to the type of measure used, either prenatally or postnatally. So it wasn't the case that the questionnaire measures were less sensitive to picking up that response or the type of interaction that was observed postnatally. Nor was it the case that the sample characteristics moderated the strength of the association. So it wasn't the case that this association was particularly strong for first-time parents, or whether it was important when during gestation you took the measurement, or whether or not the sample seemed to be particularly at risk socially or clinically. So thinking about some implications, I guess I'm quite tentative in the conclusions I'd like to draw. But it seems that prenatal thoughts and feelings about that the developing fetus might be an important part, or one part of the puzzle that explains variability in postnatal caregiving. So a bit like Stefan said, I guess that we're still interested in how those thoughts during pregnancy are affecting later development. I guess there's variability across effect sizes in different studies. So I would argue that we need more research, specifically with dads. So of the 14 studies, only 4 did include fathers, and that's pretty standard for developmental psychology. So in order to see whether or not we can be universal in sort of these findings, it'd be nice to include a few more fathers. It'd be nice to be able to explore differences within, rather than just questionnaires versus interviews. It'd be nice to look at the different types to sort of compare within questionnaires, but people keep using proliferating measures, and I'd argue that maybe stick to the ones we've got for now and then see what happens. And though I didn't find any differences by risk, it would be nice to be able to explore that a bit further. Again, most of the samples were community, so it'd be nice to be able to explore that a bit more. And should we be measuring expectant parents' thoughts and feelings? Should we be encouraging certain types of thoughts and feelings? I'd be really careful not to contribute to any sort of paranoia. I thought it was really interesting in Gavin's talk about diet, and I think that's something expectant parents are really interested in. And I guess I wouldn't want to add to any sort of stress that or anxiety that parents might be feeling during that pregnancy phase. And there might be lots of reasons why parents don't want to engage. Maybe they've experienced miscarriage, or maybe they're, this is a much wanted baby after years of IVF. So it might be a protective mechanism for some people not to engage. However, what I would say is that from the research that I've done so far is that current antenatal education is limited in scope, specifically the national public provision. And it's mostly focused on birth, and I don't think it would hurt to maybe encourage parents to think a bit more about who they're going to be meeting and the parenting that they're going to be doing, rather than focusing on hopefully what's just one day of the actual birth. So just quickly, next steps. So the New Fathers and Mothers study has happily continued. Sadly, at the minute, as the reception visits have been disrupted, don't know why, but they're going to be online, and we're hoping to, or I'm hoping to see how Mindmindedness changes across the first few years of life and how it's linked to children's outcomes at school and parenting across that time. And I'm really excited to be involved with another study called the Evidence for Better Lives study, which is across 8 different low and middle income countries, looking at development over that transition too. And I'm currently assessing the conceptual measurement equivalent of a prenatal attachment questionnaire. So that's quite exciting to see sort of the developmental and geographical specificity or universality of some of these constructs that I've talked about today. So thank you. I hope you were able to hear all of that.